previous sections we've looked at some fundamental Excel formatting options. How to change the color of a cell, how to change the font style, font size, bold, underline, adding borders, and many other features. In this section we're going to look at some more advanced formatting options, in particular using the Format as Table function to quickly format our data tables, and also looking at enhancing our workbooks using themes. Let's start off first of all with the Format as Table function. Here I have a table of data, and in my previous examples I went about formatting that table by highlighting the top row, changing the color, adding borders to demonstrate a grid format, etc. There's an easy shortcut in Excel to achieving the same effect, and that is to use the Format as Table function. To access this function, I'll go to the Home tab, to Styles, and choose to Format as Table. There's a huge variety of different table styles I can pick, and which one you pick will depend largely on your personal preference. I'm going to keep it simple with this particular design. When I choose a design from the Format as Table menu, Excel will automatically recognize the table area. As you can see, the marching ants are moving all the way around my data, and effectively it is the equivalent of using the shortcut Control-A to select the data that is around your table. I could also simply click on this button and manually select the area I want to make into a table, but I'm happy that Excel's automatic approach is selecting the data I'm interested in. I have another option here, and that's whether or not to recognize the headers of my table. If I was to untick this option, Excel would assume that this top row is data and not in fact a header. So we would treat it as part of the data section and we'll try and add a table header on top of the table itself. And that would have a default column headers such as column A, column B, column C, or something to that effect. I don't want Excel to do this, so I'm going to leave that button ticked, and Excel will recognize the table headers that are already in place and format them appropriately. So from here I'm just going to click OK, and we'll see what happens with our formatting. As you can see, Excel has taken my default design and has applied it to the data I had. It has made my headers slightly bolder, it has added some borders to the cells to add a line at the top and the bottom. The data itself has been banded in colors to make it easier for my eye to follow one row of data from one side to the other. And finally there's another underline at the bottom of the table. Now the table style that you use will vary greatly. As discussed, there's a huge number, and even after I've selected my table style I can come back to this menu and choose a different one. In fact, I can just simply hover my mouse over the different styles and see which one takes my fancy. Let's say I want to move to this style instead. It is worth mentioning before I go any further that this function of formatting as a table not just formats the table but creates a table. Excel will now recognize this data in a different way. We're going to understand much more about using table structure in our formulas later on in the program. We'll also learn how to manipulate these filter buttons at the top of the table. But for now I'm just interested in the formatting options available within tables. Once I've chosen a table style, I have a variety of other customizations I can make to the table itself. And these are found within the Table Tools Contextual tab. It is a contextual tab because it is only active when I select on an object that that tab is relevant to. So just for illustration, I'm going to click away from my table, and we'll see that that contextual tab is no longer available because I'm no longer working with the table. If I click back into the data, my contextual tools will appear. So these are all the different things that I can do with my table. I can change the formatting, and I can do some filtering and other database type functionality. But what I want to show you is some of these simple options here. Within my table I can do things like highlight the header row or choose not to highlight the header row. I can introduce a totals row. Let's click on total row and see what happens. Excel will automatically add a total row to the bottom of our data, and we'll add a sum formula in the leftmost column. Now, this formula may seem unfamiliar, but trust me, it is equivalent to the sum formula we have been using earlier on in the program. And we'll revisit this formula structure later on. For now, all we need to know that we have the option to tick this button and introduce a subtotal. As we can see from the table, we have banded rows. As discussed, this is to allow the eye to follow one row of data more easily. But if we don't like this feature, we can simply remove it. In some situations, we may want to highlight the first column of our data because that first column might be a very important field, such as customer name or customer ID. To highlight that information, I can simply click on this button, first column, and that first column will be highlighted. Similarly, I can highlight the last column. And in fact, if I'm likely to need to train my eye down the list column-wise rather than row-wise, I may want to band the columns of the table. But all of these options don't really seem relevant to me right now, so I'm going to revert back to my standard design. The final thing to mention is that we also have control over the filter button. As discussed, the filter button will be examined in more detail later on in the program, but it's also worth knowing that we can choose whether or not to display those filters or not by unselecting or selecting the filter buttons. So that is our introduction into the power of using the Format as Table to quickly and easily format your data tables.